couldn't believe my life had come to this. One moment I was buried under casebooks and caffeine-fueled nights in a cramped law library. The next I found myself hand-trembling over a glossy contract in a skyscraper boardroom. My name is Spencer Hayes, 24. A law student barely scraping by. Tuition debts looming, scholarships slipping just out of reach. And yet there I was, opposite Troy Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries. A man whose reputation for being ruthless was whispered in city corridors. His phone number passing hands like a corporate curse rather than a contact. From the moment I walked into his world, I felt like a guest in someone else's life. The elevator ride up to the 52nd floor had felt endless. The doors opened to a panorama of glass and steel, city lights stretching like a promise and a warning. Troy stood there, tall and immaculate in his tailored charcoal suit, the cityscape behind him merging with his sharp silhouette. His eyes were dark but clear, full of purpose. And when he spoke, his voice didn't just command, it carved. "I hear you're the best moot court student in your class," he said, his tone neutral but his gaze calculating. I swallowed. "Thank you, sir," I managed. My palms sweated and my heart raced. This wasn't just an interview. Something far bigger was at stake. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the glass table between us. "I need someone who knows the law and has no precedent tied to it. Someone unencumbered, someone clean. And you, Mr. Hayes, eligible, interested in more than just work." Everything inside me froze. The words "more than just work" echoed in my mind like a riddle I couldn't solve. "I am not sure I understand," I said, but I did. I understood too well. Troy smiled. Not warmly. It was a business smile that sliced curiosity and fear in equal measure. "You sign a contract. You enter an arrangement. You become part of the family. Secretly. Married. For 1 year." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "You'll act the part. You'll gain experience. I'll fund your final year of law school. And you'll sign away any public claim to the relationship." I stared at him. I weighed the possibility. Law school expenses had become a bear I could barely placate. My parents had sacrificed so much. My little sister looked up to me. If the deal was legitimate, it could change our whole trajectory. But marriage? Secret? To a man whose kindness I had not yet seen? To someone whose reputation I feared? And what was I really signing myself into? "Yes," I said, not boldly, not with conviction, but something inside me told me this was the chance I'd been waiting for. Troy slid the contract across the table and a gold pen glinted in the light. When I signed, the city's hum outside seemed to pause. And just like that, I closed. I was a law student no more simply treading water. I had entered a covenant with a shark, and I didn't yet know the depth of the ocean I'd plunged into. The next weeks blurred into a confusing mixture of lectures, board meetings, photo ops, and late nights. My life became dual-tracked. By day, I argued torts and constitutional law. By night, I attended black tie functions beside Troy, smile fixed, hand clasped, posing as his fiancée. The public saw us, CEO and young law graduate on the rise. The secret saw us. Roommate dinners, shared laughter in the kitchen, arguments over trivialities, but always the contract hovering between us. Troy was demanding in ways no textbook could teach me. He expected punctuality, composure, flawless appearance. He expected me to know how to navigate the social stratum of his world. Board members, ambassadors, high-stakes dinners where the wine was older than me and the names I dropped in conversation meant fortunes, not campus clubs. I fumbled, stumbled, but he seldom missed it. Yet something unexpected happened. Late one night, I found him in the rooftop garden, overlooking the city lights. He looked smaller somehow, distant. I lingered. "You should be resting," I said softly. He didn't turn. "Do you ever rest, Troy?" I asked. He straightened. "Not until the company and I are secured." His voice held fatigue, raw. "You think I'm ruthless," he said. "Perhaps I was once. But I won't lose what I built. I can't." His honesty, so rare and near fragile, shocked me. I sat beside him. The wind stirred our hair. The city sparkled. He glanced at me. "You're doing more than just pretend," he breathed. "You're something real in all this." My throat tightened. I didn't respond, but I felt the truth. I cared for him. More than I ever intended. The contract remained a barrier. Secret marriage. Public facade. Hidden truth. I navigated between obligation and emotion. My law assignments began to reflect what I was living: cases of power imbalance, hidden contracts, human dignity. I wrote with fire, with empathy. I realized I was changing through the experience, through Troy. One afternoon, a crisis thundered into our lives. A hostile board member demanded the company merge. Broadcast demands of personal interest conflicts between CEO and supposed fiancé. The board smelled scandal. If our secret leaked, the damage would be colossal. For him, for me. I begged Troy to tell them the truth. His eyes blazed. We signed an oath of silence, Spencer. My heart recoiled. But the risk, what about you? What about us? He looked away. Some things I built cannot afford exposure. I felt torn. My integrity as a law graduate, my sense of justice, clashing with the promise I made and the man I grew to love. At our flat that night, I asked him, "Why me?" He stared at the floor. "Because you had nothing to hide. Because you listened. Because he struggled. Because you are someone I trust." He reached for my hand. His touch was warm, surprising. "But not because I'm kind." He added quietly, "I don't know how to do that." I looked in his eyes and said, "Then teach me." In the wake of the board's threat, we made a plan. We would go public on our terms. I would emerge not as a puppet but as a partner. Not as a law student being bought, but as an advocate, as Troy's equal. I drafted a speech. We prepared our story. We risked everything. When the day arrived, I stood in front of the board and shareholders, Troy by my side. I spoke of freedom, of dignity, of hidden lives becoming visible. I told them the contract was the beginning but not the end. I said that love cannot be dictated by mergers, secrets, or power. And when I finished, Troy looked at me, pride shining in his eyes rather than calculation. In that moment I knew we had changed the story, not by hiding, but by claiming truth. The room was silent when I finished. Every pair of eyes fixed on us. Some burning with disbelief, others wide with curiosity. I could almost hear the air vibrating with unspoken questions. Then came the murmurs, low, dissonant, dangerous. Someone at the far end of the table leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "So, what you're saying, Mr. Hayes, is that this relationship began as a contractual arrangement?" I felt Troy's gaze shift toward me, a silent warning not to overstep. But I'd promised myself something that morning in the mirror. I wouldn't let fear dictate my life anymore. "Yes," I said clearly, "that's how it started. But contracts end. People don't have to." A ripple went through the room. Gasps, whispers, the sound of pen tips scratching notes. I continued, heart pounding. I was a law student drowning in debt, and he was a man buried in obligations. Maybe we both needed something the other could offer. But what we found, I glanced at Troy, my voice softening, was something neither of us expected. Something human. When I finished, I half expected Troy to rebuke me, to remind me of the conditions we'd signed under. But instead, he rose. His voice was calm, deliberate, each word landing like a stone in still water. "I don't deny it," he said. "Yes, it was a contract. Yes, it was meant to serve my company. But this man beside me," his eyes flicked to mine, intense and unwavering, "has reminded me that power means nothing without honesty. That loyalty isn't bought. It's earned." The boardroom stayed deathly quiet. Then the oldest board member, a silver-haired man named Grayson, spoke. "Caldwell," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle, "you've made your share of mistakes. But I've never seen you speak like this." Troy straightened. "Because for once, I'm not speaking to protect myself. I'm speaking for us." That word, us, shook something loose in me. It wasn't part of the contract. It wasn't business language. It was personal, raw, real. Grayson nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it's time Caldwell Industries remembered what kind of company it wants to be." There was no immediate decision. There never is in boardrooms, just long looks, half-hidden calculations. But we left that room hand in hand, and for the first time I didn't feel like a pawn. I felt like an equal. The days that followed were chaos. The media storm hit like a hurricane. Caldwell's secret marriage exposed, Law student lover. Corporate scandal. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Reporters camped outside the building. Some classmates messaged me in disbelief. Others congratulated me in awkward emojis. I hid inside the apartment for nearly a week. Troy managed the press with the same precision he ran his company, but I could tell he was exhausted. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd see him pacing near the window, the skyline reflected in his eyes like a battlefield he couldn't abandon. One evening, I got up and stood beside him. "You should rest," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "You've told me that before. And you didn't listen then either." He laughed quietly, a rare, low sound that made my chest ache. I didn't have anyone worth listening to. I reached out and touched his arm. "You do now." For a long moment we just stood there, the city murmuring beneath us. He finally said, "You know this isn't over. They'll still come after me, after us." "I know," I said, "but I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me, searching my face for a trace of hesitation. There was none. Something softened in his expression, the steel in his eyes melting into something warmer. "Then maybe we'll make it," he whispered. Weeks passed. The company stabilized against all odds. Some board members resigned. Others stayed, surprisingly supportive. Troy's public image shifted from ruthless to resilient, the narrative reframed by our honesty. Investors liked a redemption story, and in the midst of it all, my final exams approached. One night I was studying at the kitchen counter when Troy walked in, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one toward me. "To the man who somehow survived my world," he said. I smirked. "Barely." He leaned against the counter, watching me. "You've changed everything, Spencer." I raised an eyebrow. "I think you mean I made a mess of your perfect reputation." "No," he shook his head. "You gave it meaning." I didn't know what to say. He was never one for grand words, and hearing them from him felt like the world had shifted slightly off its axis. He reached for my hand. "When this started, I thought I could control everything. People, outcomes, even emotions. But I couldn't control you. And that's what terrified me." I looked up. "Why?" "Because you made me want to be better." The air between us grew heavy. I felt his thumb trace the edge of my fingers, slow and uncertain. "You already are," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Not yet, but I will be." Then he leaned in and kissed me. Slow, deliberate, nothing contractual about it. It was a promise written not on paper but on skin, on breath, on everything we'd fought to build. Graduation came faster than I expected. My name echoed through the auditorium, applause rising as I crossed the stage. When I turned toward the audience, my eyes found him instantly. Troy, in a dark suit, standing in the back row, clapping with that same restrained pride that had once terrified me. But now it just made me feel safe. After the ceremony, he met me outside. The afternoon sun caught in his hair, softening his usual sharpness. "So, Counselor Hayes," he said, "how does it feel to be free of contracts?" I laughed. "I'm not sure I am." "Oh." I stepped closer. "There's still one I want to renew." His eyes widened just slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You sure?" "I'm told my clauses are brutal." "I've read worse," I said, smiling. He took my hand then, right there in public, no hiding this time. The crowd didn't gasp or whisper. Maybe some people did, but I didn't care. For once, I was proud of what we were, proud of how far we'd come. We walked together down the university steps, the world sprawling wide ahead of us. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a poor law student or a man trapped in someone else's story. I felt like I'd written my own. And as we reached the car, Troy turned to me and said quietly, "You changed the definition of ruthless, you know?" "How's that?" He smiled. "Now it means fighting for what matters." The following months unfolded like the quiet after a storm, calm, but never empty. Troy and I had weathered exposure, judgment, and the slow burn of rebuilding trust in a world that loved scandal more than sincerity. Yet, somehow, amid all the noise, we found peace. We moved into a smaller apartment overlooking the river. Not the cold, glass-walled penthouse of his old life, but a place with wooden floors, mismatched chairs, and a balcony just wide enough for two. Every morning, Troy made coffee. Every night, I made dinner. The rhythm was simple, human, and for the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by assistants or guarded by agendas. He was just Troy. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window, as though the skyline still whispered to him, pulling him back into that world of control and ambition. But then he'd turn, meet my eyes, and I'd see it. The quiet decision to stay in this new life we'd built, even if it scared him. One evening, while sorting through paperwork for my first job offer at a law firm, I found the old contract, the marriage agreement that had once defined us. The ink had faded slightly, but the signatures were still bold, heavy with the weight of who we used to be. I set it on the table, heart thudding, and called out, "Troy!" He appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands. "What's that?" "Our contract," I said. "The one that started all of this." He looked at it for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then he smiled faintly. "That paper caused more chaos than a hostile takeover." I traced the line of my own signature with a fingertip. "It doesn't mean anything now." "No," he said softly. "But it did once. It saved me from a life that was killing me." He sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You know," he said, "when I first drafted this, I didn't think you'd last a month. You were so quiet, so painfully honest." "Sorry to disappoint," I teased. "Disappoint?" He laughed under his breath. "Spencer, you ruined my plan. You made me fall for someone real." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the weight of everything unspoken. I looked at him, the man who'd once been nothing but power and calculation, and saw the truth. He'd been lonely. His ruthlessness had been armor, his ambition a shield. And somehow I had slipped past it. I picked up the contract and tore it down the middle. The sound was small but final. "No more pretending," I said. He reached for my hand. "No more contracts. Just us." He smiled. "Just us." My first day at the firm came quicker than expected. As I stood in front of the mirror, straightening my tie, Troy appeared behind me, adjusting my collar with practiced ease. "You'll be incredible," he said. "You sound awfully confident for someone who used to call me a liability." "I've learned," he said, smirking. "Never underestimate the poor law student." I laughed and leaned against him. "You know, I still feel like that sometimes." He met my eyes in the reflection. "Then remember this, poverty never defined you. Integrity did." His words stuck with me all day. The firm was a world apart from the one I'd known. Polished, competitive, sharp-edged, but I walked through its halls with a steadiness I hadn't had before. Every case, every client, every late-night briefing reminded me why I had fought so hard to be here. I wasn't working for power anymore. I was working for purpose. Troy called that night, his voice softer than usual. "How was it?" "Long, but good," I said. "Feels like I'm finally standing on my own." He paused, then said quietly, "You always were. You just needed someone to remind you." A few weeks later, we attended a charity gala, our first public event together since everything had gone public. Cameras flashed when we arrived, but this time, neither of us flinched. Inside, people greeted us with cautious smiles. Some out of curiosity, others out of genuine respect. It was strange, how something once taboo had turned into quiet admiration. Maybe it wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. During the speech portion of the evening, the host called Troy to the stage to speak about corporate ethics and social responsibility, two words that used to mean nothing to him. I watched from the crowd, heart swelling as he began. "There was a time," he said, "when I believed control was everything, that the measure of success was how much you could hold onto no matter the cost. But I learned something the hard way. Power without compassion is hollow. Business without honesty is just survival." He paused, scanning the audience until his gaze landed on me. "And love," he added, voice steady, "is not weakness, it's clarity." The room erupted in applause. Afterward, when he returned to our table, I couldn't stop smiling. "You sounded almost human up there," I teased. He chuckled. "Don't let that get around. It'll ruin my image. Too late, I said. You already ruined it the moment you fell for me. He grinned. Worth it. Months turned into a year. The city changed, seasons spun, and we learned the quiet art of staying. Some nights were still hard. Troy's business faced setbacks. I lost cases. We argued about things that didn't matter. But we always came back to the same truth. We'd already survived worse. One evening, on the anniversary of our so-called contract, Troy surprised me with dinner on the balcony. The city shimmered below, the air carrying that faint scent of rain that always reminded me of our first meeting. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. To the strangest beginning, he said. And to the best ending, I replied. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. My heart stopped when I saw the small velvet box. Before you say anything, he said, eyes flicking up to mine. This time there's no contract, no terms, just choice. He opened the box. Inside, a simple silver band gleamed. Nothing extravagant, just real. Spencer Hayes, he said quietly. Will you marry me? Not for a company, not for survival, but because somewhere between lies and boardrooms and late-night takeout, you became the only truth I trust? I didn't speak, couldn't. I just nodded, tears catching in my throat as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Then I laughed. A small, breathless laugh. You know, this time I didn't even read the fine print. He smiled. Good. There isn't any. The rain started to fall, light at first, then steadier. We stayed on that balcony, soaked and laughing, the city glowing beneath us. Somewhere far below, the world kept turning, headlines kept spinning. But up there, in that small pocket of light, there was only us. No contracts, no secrets, just 2 men who had dared to rewrite what love could look like. The sun spilled through the curtains in ribbons of gold, catching the edge of the coffee mug on the nightstand and the faint line of a scar that ran across Troy's wrist, an old mark from the life he'd once lived too sharply. I lay there for a moment, watching him breathe, slow and even, his hair tousled and his expression softer than the world ever got to see. It had been 6 months since the proposal. 6 months since the world had seen the ruthless CEO of Caldwell Industries kneel, not for power, but for love. 6 months of laughter, of mornings that smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast instead of boardrooms and stress. And still, sometimes, I woke up and couldn't quite believe it. Stop staring, Troy muttered without opening his eyes. I smiled. You're awake. I've been awake, he said, his voice rough from sleep. But I was enjoying pretending not to be, just to see how long you'd stare. Old habits, I said, rolling onto my side. You were impossible to read back then. I used to watch you just to figure out what you were thinking. He finally opened his eyes. Blue-gray, focused, still sharp but warmer now. And, did you ever figure it out? Eventually, I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. You were lonely. He laughed softly. That's one word for it. I sat up, stretching. The ring on my finger caught the light. Even after all this time, it felt unreal, like a dream that had forgotten to end. Troy propped himself up on an elbow. You're thinking too much again, he said. I can hear it. Just wondering, I murmured. Do you ever miss it? The chaos, the control. He was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted. There's a strange comfort in chaos when you've lived inside it long enough. But then I remember what came after. The quiet, the peace, the mornings like this. His hand found mine under the sheets. And I don't miss it anymore. I leaned in and kissed him, slow and deep, until words didn't matter. Later that morning, we took a walk along the river. Autumn had brushed the trees in gold and crimson, and the air held that crisp kind of chill that makes every breath feel alive. We'd become a familiar sight in the neighborhood. 2 men with coffee cups in hand, arguing about everything from art to law to who forgot to buy milk. Troy had swapped tailored suits for rolled sleeves and sneakers. Sometimes people recognized him, usually an older businessman or a journalist who remembered the scandal, but no one whispered anymore. They nodded, smiled even. Time had softened the edges of our story. We stopped at a small bookshop tucked between cafes. The owner, a kind woman with too many cats and not enough shelving, greeted us with her usual grin. "Back for more legal thrillers, Spencer?" "Actually," I said. "He's the one addicted to them now." Troy raised an eyebrow. "I like understanding what makes you tick." "You mean you like arguing with fictional lawyers?" "Semantics," he said, smirking. We spent an hour browsing. At one point, I found him in the poetry section, thumbing through a worn copy of Whitman. He caught me watching. "Don't say it," he warned. "I didn't know CEOs read poetry." "I didn't either," he said. "Until you." That night, after dinner, I found a small envelope on my desk. Inside was a folded note in Troy's handwriting. "For the man who taught me that strength isn't silence, that love isn't weakness, that peace is something you build, not inherit." Beneath it, a key. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up as he leaned against the doorway. "Our next step," he said. "There's a place by the lake. It's not fancy, but it's ours." "Troy," I whispered. He smiled. "No contracts this time. Just a home." We moved in a month later. The house was small, the kind of place that creaked when the wind blew too hard and smelled faintly of pine. The lake shimmered beyond the backyard, a mirror to the sky. We spent the first few nights unpacking boxes, arguing about where the coffee machine should go, and laughing until the neighbors probably thought we were insane. One morning, I woke early to find him sitting on the dock, watching the sunrise. A thermos of coffee sat beside him, steam curling into the cool air. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, joining him. He shook his head. "Just thinking about how far we came." I followed his gaze to the horizon. "You ever think we'd make it here?" "No," he said honestly. "But I think I hoped." He reached for my hand. "You know what the irony is? I used to think love was something you acquired, like property or stock. Something you managed. But you can't manage love. You can only live it." I smiled. "And are you living it?" He turned toward me. "Every day." A year passed, quiet and golden. I took on pro bono cases, fighting for people who couldn't afford representation. Troy started a foundation for ethical business leadership, mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to build without destroying. We were busy, but balanced. Separate paths, same heartbeat. On weekends, we hosted friends, former colleagues, classmates, even Grayson from the board, who'd become an unlikely ally. Sometimes they'd bring wine, sometimes advice, but always laughter. The house by the lake became a refuge, a symbol of something neither of us had growing up. Peace earned, not given. One evening, rain drummed against the windows as thunder rolled in the distance. We were sitting by the fire, both reading, him a business report, me a crime novel. He set his papers down suddenly. "You ever think about kids?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I said. "But I always thought you didn't." "I didn't," he admitted. "But lately I think I want to build something that lasts beyond us." I looked at him, studying the man I once thought unchangeable. "Then we'll figure it out," I said. "Together." He nodded, exhaling softly. "Together." Years later, I'd tell that story to our son, the boy we adopted from a shelter 3 towns over. I'd tell him how his father used to be a hurricane, and how I somehow convinced the storm to stay. He'd laugh, eyes wide,